the example that people often give is if you imagine a film and a particular scene, say something quite emotional or like a horror film, or and if you watch that scene once and then you watch it again but you turn the sound off, it's very common that the power of the image loses its drama. And so in a way, I mean, that's a very kind of manipulative, controlled situation where sound really gives a kind of emotional presence to the image. And it's a kind of something that's very direct, that really touches you. And I guess in a way you can also see this in music, that often people, when they try to talk about music on a kind of general level, it tends to be quite immediate and emotional and direct, that you just sort of love this song, you know. You don't really get too far into kind of examining it or describing it in language, something much more sensual. So this, you know, might be kind of a big aspect of what sound kind of gives us in terms of kind of communicating an idea or communicating to another through this kind of immediacy and this kind of emotional presence. And I do think that, you know, that is true. And if we kind of maybe put this into a kind of everyday experience, you know, we can see how also sounds can really annoy people. And that's very different. I mean, it's funny how there's always this question of noise pollution and noise disturbance, but I'm not sure. I know, you know, there's some discussion about kind of visual pollution, but it tends to be very different. That the idea that we fill the city with visual images, with advertising, signs, shop windows, you know, that just kind of fill the street with this visual information, tends to not really, it offends our senses in a much more kind of abstract way. Whereas if you fill the street with noise, you know, people are immediately kind of emotionally annoyed. And it's kind of a direct physical annoyance. So this seems to be kind of the way in which sound is kind of giving us information. You could say that in a way. I mean, I'm not really sure why memory kind of becomes part of my work. I mean, it's I guess in a way it's generally more about people's experience, and my own experience, and the way in which those experiences affect us, and we carry them with us. So the idea that things touch us, that we move through the world and kind of have experiences and interactions, that in a way how that really forms who we are. And I guess for me, kind of sound, music, memory really is also just about looking at or being curious about how sounds come to determine who we are. So whether that's more about music and songs that kind of stick with us in our memory, or about kinds of experiences related to sound that kind of lead us to somehow form our sensory architecture, that we then kind of carry with us, that we sort of inhabit. So memories are very, very fascinating, and how they continue to surface later on. that it's a kind of ongoing process. So all these things for me are kind of a very rich area to explore. Construction of identity. Maybe in a way one large aspect, which I think is always really fascinating, is of course the question of the voice. And for me, the voice and identity are really so intertwined, and the voice as a kind of primary sound, as the kind of almost most central sound that we all make, generally, if we can speak. But even it's not even really a question of speech. It's speech, but it's also just the sound that comes out of the mouth. So it's language, but it's also just a kind of, it's almost a move towards speaking, that we make sounds to try to express the self and then also connect with others. So to me, when you maybe start thinking about sound and the construction of identity, I can't help but think about this kind of very primal, central sound of the voice. And that is always a kind of very interesting thing to examine and look at and think about, is the performance of the voice, the way in which the voice is us, how my voice is me, and at the same time the voice is always separate from me. I can't really, and there's always that amazing sense that you really don't know your voice, that the way people hear your voice is totally different than how I hear it. So there's kind of an interesting dynamic with the voice and how we kind of rely upon it to convey my identity, that I use my voice to express who I am and the various emotions and situations that I'm in, and at the same time somehow it also controls me, like it's